чого він? Що він
Тобто
нам
ми
дасть?
спочатку починаємо з того, для чого він.
Ну, можемо почати, так. Може це логічно.
Ну, тобто, я думаю, що глядачам важливо зрозуміти взагалі для чого, що це за механізм.
А потім в кінці будемо підсумовувати, так?
Ну, а потім вже
От можна просто сказати, це місія незалежних експертів, які вивчають інформацію і потім роблять доповідь і якісь свої рекомендації.
Ну, так, поговорити про це, ну, ми ж розуміємо, що наше суспільство навіть...
Good morning, good afternoon. I welcome everyone who joined us. I'm Olha This is the Ukraine Media Center. 10 years of the war have elapsed, and this is the third year of the full-scale invasion. And we will today talk about the Moscow mechanism of the OSCE. It was on the 29th of February that OSCE has launched the mechanism on the arbitrary deprivation of freedom of civilian Ukrainians by the Russian Federation. We will talk about this today. Our speakers today are Olha Reshetylova, she is head of the Media Initiative for Human Rights, Yelyzaveta Sokurenko, who coordinates the direction of documenting war crimes at the ZMINA Center for Human Rights, and Andrii Yakovlev, who is the lawyer in international law, and he also is from the Media Initiative for Human Rights. So what is the mechanism, why it was launched, and what we do expect from it? Hello. First of all, I want to tell you that, of course, the sound is not very pleasant. However, this is only the Moscow as a geographical definition, and this was in 1991 when Moscow in Russia was different from what it is now. This is the mechanism created by different states, and different states provide their experts, the criteria being independence, being well known, and the expert level, of course. They study materials and provide their conclusions in their report and recommendation. It does sound as a non-obligatory document, but we can say that in reality this is a very weighty significance. The decisions of a Moscow mechanism are very important because they corroborate some circumstances at the level of OSCE in an adequate way, and this is going to be the international mechanism which, through the uniqueness of experts and their independence, will confirm the facts that we already know. It's not only about the confirmation of the violation of rights of civilian hostages, but we will also use it as a basis for collecting data on such people, and we will use it in many cases, including international. There's quite a lot of respect for the Moscow mechanism, and the latest decision of the UN International Court does quote the documents of the UN bodies and other bodies, including Moscow mechanism, as the data that confirms some facts that can be evaluated. The same goes for the International Criminal Court, and this is probably the most interesting, that the ICC can use this data not only for establishing facts, but as an argument that this is so serious that it transgresses the national level and goes to the international level. So we may expect that this will lead to a new case of civilian hostages. Where and how the experts will collect these data? What is the mechanism of this? Well, generally speaking, they have to get an access to the territory of Ukraine, including the occupied territory. It is safe to say that they will try to ask Russia about this. Another element is that they can get reports from the independent NGOs, which have already some evidence, and then they can, of course, talk to witnesses and victims, and I think that they have done this already because they were asking us about whether they can use the previous experience. Olha, what are the prospects that are opened before us? Generally speaking, the existence of the Moscow mechanism is one of the stages of the great plan that our NGO and other partners from the 5 a.m. coalition has worked out to release, to free civilian hostages and bring to responsibility the culprits. We cannot talk about all the details because we understand that Russia will try to counteract the plan, but we can tick the box where it goes about the Moscow mechanism. We were working on this for 18 months. We have conducted something like a dozen events together with victims, and the victims have testified at the OSCE session hall in Khalburs. This was very complicated, of course, logistically and emotionally. I'm very grateful to Ukrainian offices in Vienna and other places, our missions and our allies' missions in the OSCE, the USA, the UK, and many, many others. They have always helped us with conducting these events. And the last full stop, I think, was the Ministers' Conference of the OSCE, Ministers of Foreign Affairs. They held it in Skopje in November last year. We conducted a special event there with the attendance of victims. We were on our way to Skopje, and then we got to know that Lavrov was going to this conference, while our event has to be moderated by the Ukrainian Minister Kuleba. However, they started to boycott this event, and of course, we faced the issue of conducting or not, because everyone is boycotting the Russian officials. This was a dilemma. However, we decided that we would hold the event, and this is the story when you have to follow your line in spite of all the counteraction on the part of the Russian Federation, because it actually happened in a better way, and Lavrov and his stooges were talking in one hall while we were conducting our side event where witnesses testified to the inhuman crimes that Russians are conducting in relation to civilian hostages, about torture, about deaths, and it was in parallel with Lavrov. So the ministers who decided to attend the event, the conference, they came to see what we were presented, and they really were convinced that this is a systematic policy of Russia. This is not just a case when the soldiers wanted to abuse civilians, but this actually is the concentrated and coordinated policy of Russian official bodies, starting from the Ministry of Defense to the penitentiary system, which holds now thousands of Ukrainian civilians. And while Lavrov was speaking, we called upon to create this Moscow mechanism, and in fact, the issue was already decided. So now this Moscow mechanism is launched. It is rather swift. Within a month, the experts will draw the report. The previous 3 Moscow mechanisms were on Ukraine as well. 2 of them were on general issues of violating human rights, and the 3rd was about deportation of children. And this report is recognized by the international community as one of the most powerful on the issue, and it will be evidently used by the international investigation on war crimes. So this is important for us that the Moscow mechanism is launched on one of the other crimes of Russia. We think that this is a crime against humanity, and this is not our first step leading to the potential release of civilians held by Russians. We hope very much that experts who will be defined very soon from a list composed by the OSCE will use the material worked out by the human rights organizations in Ukraine and other countries, in particular the 5 AM coalition is documenting practically every case in the IDOC database. This is, of course, a very diligent work over 2 years, and we have a terabyte of information there on Russian war crimes. We're waiting for the experts here in Ukraine. We understand that there will be a short period when they will be working in Ukraine, probably contacting our official bodies, but we also hope to meet them. We are talking about a great number of civilian hostages. We consider them hostages, although there are no conditions attached to their possible release. So we think that they are hostages, and we cannot do anything with this. When Olha said about the crimes against humanity, and we know war crimes, and war crimes are committed while war goals are being pursued. But when we are talking about crimes against humanity, there is no military goal there, no war goal, but we understand why this is being done. So we are talking about cases of the war crimes of humanity. This is what the state of Ukraine says. However, at the international level, they say, try to prove this. So the Moscow mechanism is the first step to build the argument about the crimes against humanity, to confirm at the international level that what NGOs are talking in Ukraine does happen. When we check this, then they will say that this has been confirmed. Probably they will not call this crimes against humanity because this has to be proven in court. However, this will lead to new orders for arrest, warrants, and this is one of the elements of our pressure on the situation and the way to change the behavior in relation to our people, so that they are not tortured. So as a result of the report that we will have from the OSCE, we expect that criminal proceedings will be started at the international level about such crimes, and then will we receive an algorithm of their release? Well, the experts can, of course, provide some recommendations, and evidently they will be in the report. However, the report itself does not guarantee anything. However, the accompaniment of this report, legal and other accompaniment, does guarantee quite a lot. This is a task for Ukraine as a state, for our NGOs and our international partners, so that this mechanism works further. It is very highly valued in the expert environment and elsewhere, and the results, the conclusions of these reports will evidently have the influence on everything about our hostages, and including the release of these people. It will make the situation evident to the entire world. This is a small victory and a small step towards the further future release of civilians. Let's talk about the problems that our civilian hostages are facing, how urgent this is, and how we will be able to swiftly pass this information on for working on the international arena. I cannot be unbiased when I'm talking about this, because I've been working on the topic for 2 years, and Olha has said that this is the powerful step which will lead to the agenda of the second most influential international organization being changed. And the previous speakers have said that this topic is not as urgent and as understood at the international level as it is to us and to relatives of people who are being detained and held in custody in Russia and then in the occupied territories. We may say that the result won't be brought about soon. However, important is the fact that we have to give an impetus to the work of this mechanism. And this concerns to the coalition 5 a.m. because we've seen that Russia is not reacting to any calls to provide information about civilian hostages. We don't even know their exact number. We get information from those who were freed or exchanged. However, they are not numerous. From the people who have been freed, we get to know about those who are still in detention. And in the occupied territories, Russia continues to detain people even now. People are being accused according to the Russian criminal legislation. They are being accused of espionage, riots, and in the participation in the Azov battalion activities. Back in 2014, we have more than once presented our material in this center, and we can say that this is all arbitrary, and this is very often connected to psychological and physical violence. There are, of course, forced people who are going missing forcibly, and we've seen such reports about both civilians and POWs, because that they are being constantly systematically beaten and otherwise tortured. And if this becomes known on the scale of the international community, not only Ukraine, this will help us. When we are talking to the international audience about the scale of this tragedy, what is the scale? What is the number of victims? I've already said that we don't know the exact figure of civilian hostages. The last figure from the coordination center is 1,600 people, but it is evident that there can be many more such people, and for quite some time there has been no link and connection with these people, like with people who were abducted in March 2022 in Kiev region. This is unknown where they are. There is some fragmented evidence. And we know that these people are being taken to other places of custody or detention, and to know exactly where they are is impossible. But I do hope that the introduction of the Moscow mechanism will help increase the pressure on Russia so that they admit the International Red Cross Committee to contact these people, and they are more active in this. And about the detention centers, we have launched the interactive map, which you can see on the site of the Media Initiative for Human Rights. You can see more than 100 places where civilian Ukrainians are held, and they are held together with POWs, and probably the only source for us to know about civilians is from what our POWs exchanged for Russians are saying. However, the Geneva Convention, which is applied to POWs, is not applicable to the civilian hostages. We hope that this declared aim will be filled with practical steps. We have ideas about how to fill this with matter and how to increase the pressure on the Russian Federation. Why we don't know the exact number? The matter is that these people were on the occupied territories, and we do not have access to the occupied territories. We don't know who exactly was abducted, but relatives tell us that a number of people have disappeared. When they are being moved to the Russian Federation territory, they are held incommunicado, and it is very hard for us to understand where we get the information from. Of course, some information does penetrate. However, Russia violates all the rights. They give no information about these people. So this person is in custody, and they cannot even tell anyone that they've been abducted or detained. This is one of the elements of the policy of the Russian Federation, very serious crime, and can be qualified as the crime against humanity. With the involvement of international experts, do we have a hope that because of this we will get more information, or will all be built on the information that we already have, our NGOs? It is evident that the experts will ask for some information from Russia, but we understand very clearly that Russia will not provide them with information. This is a very serious problem because international organizations and institutions have no access to detention centers. And I think that what we are looking at in the future is for the awareness of the entire world, because sometimes the foreign people are in the illusion that international bodies like the IRCC is a mechanism which may contact such people. However, they in reality cannot do, and we have more and more information about the deaths of such people because they are being deprived of medical help and they are just dying. And the POWs and those civilian hostages who were by some miracle released from detention centers, they say that if there were some observers, they won't be tortured and killed as much. However, it is evident that it is still impossible to get the access to these people from the Russian Federation. There may be many more than we know about this. We see how actively they are being moved across the Russian-held territory, and there are many such centers across the Russian Federation. We need badly the information about such people. However, even when the war finishes, it may happen so that we have no information and will never know about such people because they are being taken to Siberia, to Udmurtia and other remote places in Russia. We understand that the state is collecting evidence. We understand that a lot of NGOs are working about this. Do we know how many cases we have on such crimes? Every day, almost every day, we have conferences about the investigation of such crimes, and we've been saying even today that because Ukraine has not ratified the Statute of Rome, we have no demand to request to Ukrainian law enforcers to systematically investigate such people, such cases. Even today, we had a case when our people, where our law enforcers interrogated one person who was asked only about his detention in Dimir, but not in Hostomel or later on the territory of Belarus, which is insufficient, of course. But I understand that our law enforcers are not investigating this systematically because they have no request for this from the criminal code. So we insist on ratifying the Statute of Rome and our criminal code being adjusted, aligned with the international law, and then our law enforcers will be obliged to systematically treat such cases and show it. The matter is that our criminal code has only one article on war crimes and does not have an article on crimes for humanity. For instance, the events in Bucha we treat as a war crime. However, the Poles, for instance, treat this as a crime against humanity. And the matter is that Germany or Sweden, for instance, had articles like ours, but when they ratified the Statute of Rome, this problem has gone away. So now we investigate the war crimes, not the crimes against humanity. And the specific investigator, individual investigator, cannot even understand what what he or she is investigating. The Prosecutor General's office does understand this, but a individual investigator does not qualify it as the crime against humanity. So we have to change the criminal code so that use the clauses of the criminal code. And because of this, we do not have statistics. We are just looking at the Article 438, the violation of the customs and laws of war. I also wanted to add, when you're asking what this will give us, we know that Russia sometimes show their strength on the diplomatic front, where they have quite an influence, including the global south. But this mission is one of the tools to fight them with an international mechanism. We won't be just saying that our rights are violated. However, now they will think you are victims and maybe you are exaggerating, but this actually provides us with the weapon that Russia uses. We will be saying, no, you have systematic problems, and this will lead to the prosecution of many cases, and this is the change of the situation of people. When you saw the case on the warrant to arrest Putin, we saw that the situation with deported children has changed. We don't know whether it is connected, but the change was there. And this will probably happen to civilian hostages. Please join our conversation, colleagues. Yes, there is a question.
But I think I got the subject. My name is Lorenzo Cremonesi from Italian press, from the Italian daily Corriere della Sera from Milano. Sorry, you are touching a very important subject, of course. It was central. We spoke a lot about the question of the vanished, the kidnapped citizens of Ukraine at the beginning of the war. Lately, much less. Even for the anniversary, was not too much touched this subject, which is very central. Of course, the question you already raised, and I would like to go back, because at one point, the only number we got from, I think, from Miss Olga, 1,600, when she say, of course, there are many more. We know there are many more. Please, can you try, apart the definition, the bureaucratic problem, what is your idea? How many are they? Because we know that there are some who went because they were pro-Russian, from Donbass especially. Some of them decided, we met in the area of Avdiivka, of Bakhmut. People say when we had to decide to escape at the beginning of the war, west or east, we went to Russia because they were pro-Russia. So these are not clearly kidnapped people. These people by their free will. Others were kidnapped. We met in Kharkiv. There is a refugee center of people who are entering from the area of Sumy. We went a couple of days talking with people. Horrible stories, incredible stories. People who escaped from Kherson, who I never heard. People who had been tortured, who saw people being killed. A lot of stuff that we don't know. Mariupol, how many are? We don't know. We don't know. So rationally, I mean, if you can give us an idea, how many you think are the real kidnapped people? What is the figure? Thank you.
I think you've gotten the point that nobody knows the exact number of those people. As the Media Initiative for Human Rights tries to identify all those, we call them civilian hostages, but they are not necessary hostages. They can be the victims of arbitrary detentions or enforced disappearances, but we call them hostages as the whole group, yes? So we identified at least 1,000, as for previous week, 1,550 civilian hostages. 1,550. This, what we mean.
Sorry, from all over the areas.
Yes, what we mean when we are talking about identifying of them. We mean that we found testimonies about their detention or about their captivity somewhere in the locations of captivities, somewhere in the Russian Federation or on the occupied territories. This number is about those people who were detained after the large-scale invasion. But this problem isn't new for Ukraine. We have been dealing with this problem since the very beginning of the aggression. Before the large-scale invasion, there were the number of 140, if I'm not mistaken, so-called political prisoners from Crimea, and about 300 of hostages from Donbass. So this was before the large-scale invasion.
140 from Crimea, and how much from Donbass?
About 300 from Donbass.
That was before 2022.
Before, and they mostly they are not released yet as well. So we can add this number, 440 people before the large-scale invasion to our number of identified. But of course, we don't know the exact number of those who were detained on the occupied territories, because it is too difficult to get information from the occupation. Sometimes people are so much afraid, they don't report about what happened to those beloved ones. Sometimes they just don't have any connections. Also, for example, from the Kherson region, we have an information when the whole families were detained, and there is no one to report about it. So the main source of the information for us is from the released POWs, because they are kept together, they're held together. And from relatives, of course, much more or less from the ICRC.
But well, that's amazing. First of all, you know, this is strange because you are giving us this number, 1,550 from 2022, plus 440 political prisoner from 2014. A few days ago, I spoke again with Ms. Verashuk, and she spoke again about the 16,000 children who had been kidnapped. So
we have to separate.
Exactly.
Children, it is the separate category. Yeah, so this is about adult civilians who are detained and who are held in the places of captivity. But because, of course, when we are talking about the number of missing persons, for example, just from Mariupol, there are thousands of them.
20,000.
Yeah, but we don't know their destiny.
Yeah.
Some of them went to the Russian Federation, as you said, for their own will. Some were killed, and we don't know about this. They are just missing. But of course, there are numbers who were detained and who are held in some prisons or pre-trial detention centers all over the Russian Federation. And because nobody has access to those places of captivity, even Russian lawyers we try to cooperate with, even the ICRC or UN monitoring mission, nobody has this access. That's why we don't know the number, we don't know the names. There are some people about whom we have the information about their detention, but we never had about them anything. For example, Mikita Buzinov, he was detained in Chernigiv region, near in Mikhailo Kotyubinsky village. He was detained, and there are a lot of witnesses of his detention. But for 2 years, we had no information about him. Nobody has seen them. Nobody has heard even about him. For example, Dmytro Khylyuk, the famous journalist, Ukrainian journalist, he was detained in Kozarovichy village in the Kiev region. We had only pieces of information about his detention. We've heard that somebody had his last name in Novozybkov prison, and then somebody has seen him during the transportation to the other prison. But this is very, like, relatively, we have no witness who definitely saw or spoke to Dmytro Khylyuk, for example. And there are hundreds of the same cases.
Because you, sorry, just to help us to make this case, which I think is a huge, important case, which will help you also in front of the international court, etc. You mentioned your POW, the soldier who are going to, and there are hundreds. We're talking about, I think the last number was about 5,000 soldiers released.
We're talking about thousands. Nobody knows the exact number.
It's a kind of classify. Who you say saw some of the civilians who had been abducted. Then you have Red Cross. Then you have United Nations. And then you have your evaluation. You don't have any kind of evaluation of people who might be, who could be. You cannot give us any estimation, nothing. Who may be on jail. Because also there is another category, who are people who are not maybe in jail, who have been threatened, who have been abducted, taken out, and they're not really detained. They are in some villages under guard. I don't know. It looks to me there are different categories from prisoners that we don't take in account.
You know, yeah, we can separate them. We can search for different categories and so on. But and this is important, how to find them. Yeah, or when someone was held in a basement in some village and tortured, and then they let them go. Yes, there are some of them, and if we knew about such people, we of course interview them to have their testimonies, to document all those crimes that were committed against them. But we're talking about those who are taken to the Russian Federation or in some occupied territories in Donbass or somewhere in Kherson and Zaporizhia region, and are held for a long time, as Andrii said, incommunicado, that no one knows about their detention there. And this is this category.
If I tell you, there is because we are a lot on the ground, maybe I can help you. I mean, there are people, there's a very gray area, people who accept obtorto collo, we say in Latin, I mean, against their own will. For instance, if you don't accept the passport, you don't go to the hospital. If you don't cooperate, if you don't accept our authority, your children will not go to school. These people are, under blackmail. If you don't move out, you will not leave. I mean, basically. So they accept it, but they don't like it.
Yes, of course. There are a lot of different crimes that Russians commit in the occupied territories, and this is as well one of those crimes. But just now we are talking about this policy of detention and captivity of civilians. Like it's the policy of persecution of civilians in the occupied territories.
So we can say that at the end of the story, there are a few thousand civilians who are detained.
We can assume that there are 5,000-6,000 of civilians. We can assume, detained, who are kept or held in the different prisons and pretrial detention centers in Russia and in the occupied territories, because there are some facilities in Donetsk, Lugansk region, and so on. They even establish such places of captivity in Chongar or Chaplinka near the Crimean administrative border.
У нас ще було питання, мені здається.
Анастасія Москвичова, видання «Град».
Anastasiya Moskvichova, Grata, I wanted to have more precise information whether the Moscow mechanism investigation will apply to the civilian hostages before the large-scale invasion. And my second question is, there were 3 mechanisms before. Are there any practical results after their reports that you can link to Moscow mechanisms? Yes, as far as the first question is concerned, this report will involve the cases before the large-scale invasion. However, as far as the previous discussion is concerned, we're talking about civilian hostages held before 2022, of course, and this process goes on the occupied territories, and we or international missions have no access to these territories. We cannot put the people, the relatives under risk, because, of course, it is known that either Russian military or is presumed FSB agents were taking these people into custody, and we cannot risk the well-being of our people who will provide testimony from them. About the second issue, the practical result, we are talking about this. We can imagine that we hope that this is just one step to the international recognition of this problem and advocating of this problem on the international level, and also, of course, to provide the ICC with a way to prosecute them and to stop the violations that continue. 2 questions. First, whom we classify as civilian hostages, how a person can be entered into this list, what is the basis for this, and I understand that our international journalists can have questions about this. We understand that there are many, many people who are in captivity, but much less are documented. See, the occupied territories have of 2 parts. There are deoccupied territories and which are still under occupation. in Kharkiv or Kiev Oblast, we can go to the concrete place and talk to people, but we cannot talk or count the people who went missing on the occupied territories to enter them into any category. And the mission of UN does recognize the existence of filtration camps, and they are checking people for the loyalty to the Russian Federation, and if these people are not considered loyal to the Russian Federation, and this may involve military service for Ukraine, tattoos, expressions, and so on. So the Russians see that this person does not want to be loyal to the Russian Federation, then this person would be detained, and after they are detained, and this can be done on the territory of Zaporizhia or Kherson or Kiev Oblast, and they are being transferred through Crimea or Belarus or different Russian regions. They are being moved to other places, and all those places are meant to help people who are being investigated for criminal actions. And a soldier or a officer cannot come to the prison and say, I want to put a civilian here, but we know that they are there, and they are there in isolation from other people who are being held there according to the decisions, rulings of Russian courts. And they are there incommunicado for quite a long time. The Russians are holding them there. They say nothing about this, but they do not release them as well. And so some people go through filtration, some people don't. And this is not for a day or two. This is for several years already. So we may say that they have a goal in doing this, but they do not express their goal. And we can say that they are there because of their background. The people who say, I want to be a Russian, I want to take the Russian passport or the Russian telephone card. Other people say, no, I want to be with Ukraine. So they do not pass through filtration. And these people are being held there. How can we call them? And these people cannot even have the right to tell someone that they are there. So these people can be on the list of civilian hostages, or only those who were released, and we know for sure. As far as I know, International Red Cross sometimes confirms their existence, but this 1,500 or 1,600 is what we know about. And of course, there's a lot of people that we don't know about for sure. So as of last week, there were 490 people who were released, and we know for sure sometimes these are people who were recognized as combatants by Russia and they were exchanged. We also know some people who were released because they have very serious traumas, like Mykola Gorban, who had his legs frostbitten because they were held without any footwear in the field, and his toes started to fall away from his legs, and then he was sent back home, saying that no one is going to care here for you, let your family care for you. So there are different cases of release of such people, but they are chaotic, and there's no logic in this. However, there is logic in detainment of those people. First of all, these are active people who have their position and stand, and they aim to sow fear in the occupied communities, and it is important for them to support this fear for all the time. And while at the beginning of the occupation they detain people with a clearly expressed pro-Ukrainian position, later they start to detain people just because they want to detain them. About the international sector, many people in our official dome say that often they lack testimony and proof to prove our case in international institutions. Now, when the Moscow mechanism has been launched, what will be the communication with the official bodies so that they get even more proof and testimony, and who will be responsible for this? As far as I know, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs has already launched this work and has written to state bodies so that they support this work and use its result. I know from the case of missing children that within 2 days they held meetings with stakeholders. I hope that they will find such time and place now as well. I want to tell you about the procedure of collecting proof and testimony. Of course, it is very hard to do within 1 month, but it is possible when there's some background, and of course NGOs and the UN and the OSCE evidently have been into this problem for quite some time, and there's just a month for them to verify and combine this data. So for a month they will be mostly systematizing what they already have. I want to thank you for this conversation, for your work. And I do hope that with probably little steps, but we will reach the point when our hostages, our civilians, our children will be released. Thank you. Thank you everyone for the interest, and of course I thank our forces of security and defense. Thanks to them we are able to hold such events, and our next briefing about the blocking of our borders with Ukraine, with Poland, will happen in a couple of minutes.